Sir Aidan Flynn, all the way from Colombia, or all the way in Colombia, not from Colombia. But thanks for joining us today.
No worries. Good to see you.
I must admit, when I started doing this podcast, I didn't have Colombia on my. It wasn't a plan. I didn't expect to be doing an episode with someone in Colombia. And also, when I first met you, I didn't expect you to end up in Colombia. So we will cover that and how you're there and what you're doing there. But for the benefit of our listeners and viewers that perhaps haven't spoken or met you before, can you tell us a bit about kind of life before Salesforce and how you found your way into the Salesforce space?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess there's now, I guess if you're coming into the Salesforce platform now, it's probably very difficult to be a generalist, right? There's, anyone that's new to Salesforce has to specialize in specific areas. But yeah, when I started off, it was really just kind of Sales Cloud with a tiny bit of Service Cloud way back when. I think it was 2007, 2008 or so. I had a job which was like the sales, marketing, PR hybrid role with a company called Vivo in the education market in London. They were basically like education tech, and I was one of the first employees, and I just kind of had Salesforce thrown at me and told to make it work. So over that first couple of years, Vivo grew really quickly, and Salesforce and the company data became like my primary focus there. So that's really where I started off, and I was more, that was before I really got into consulting. And after a few years of that, I decided really I wanted a shift into a Salesforce career and utilize those skills I'd already learned as a system admin.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it was kind of an admin role, but it had already been implemented at that point, Salesforce, and you were just told to look after it, or were you implementing it for Viva?
Yeah, it was kind of right. It was a brand new company. There were only two of us, I think, at the time that were employed. So it was very much right. You've got to figure this out. And I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but actually, I'd used Goldmine at a company I was at before that, and I was kind of trying to push them towards Goldmine because I didn't really know much about Salesforce. But obviously, we went with Salesforce, and here I am today.
Well, I've not even heard of Goldmine, so that must be some old school thing back in 2007.
Yeah, it was kind of a sit on the server, difficult to scale up and that kind of system, like one of those early cuts of CRM that everyone was terrified of.
So then you moved into consulting, and this was still in London. What were those early days of consulting like? Because we are still going back a fair way. Like we're talking 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, probably 10 years now. So yeah, after Vivo, I made a jump to a consultancy called CAS Cloud in the south of England. And then the 3 years I spent there was mostly really in the SMB market. So I used to do these really short, sharp, quick starts, so 1, 3, 5 days. With very quick turnaround and often the wafer thin budgets to go with it. And Craig, who was in charge of CAS Cloud, really kind of in a good way threw me into it, and I had to skill up very quickly and kind of learn the consultancy side as well. And I ended up, well, in those early days, you worked at like insane long days because didn't really know how to put time into the scoping and the risk management, or leaving enough time for testing and UAT on the other side. So it was intense, but it really kind of set me up for what came next, which was the contract market in London.
Yeah, because you were quite quick into the contract market, and you've always, ever since I've kind of known you, you've kind of been in favour of contracting. But you were a contractor for consulting companies quite consistently throughout your time in London. Exactly.
Yeah. So really. That's really like my sweet spot is in the Salesforce consultancy. It's probably my favorite place to work in London, and Sydney as well. Actually, was Tequila. I was working with Tequila in London when Accenture bought the company, so I saw the acquisition and saw Tequila get swallowed up into Accenture's Cloud First team. And what I'd learned with CAS Cloud before, I kind of had the technology side of it nailed down, and I was able to get things done with great pace, and then going into that contract market, then it really taught me a lot more about methodology and client management. So over time, I got a lot more rounded as a consultant as a result of the exposure to that market.
And tequila sounds like a pretty I've had a number of tequila people on the podcast, Tequila UK at least, like Gary Brevington, Sebastian Wagner, Ben Edwards. Were you working with all of these guys?
Yeah, I worked very fleetingly with Ben Edwards. I think it was him that interviewed me actually on the phone before I got the contract at Tequila. I didn't meet Gary. He was at Tequila London before my time there, but obviously worked with him at Tequila in Australia. But yeah, there were some really great people in Tequila that went on. A lot of them have gone on to do their own things, started their own consultancies.
Yeah. And I should probably add that we actually are pretty much from the same place in the UK. So your next stop was in Sydney, and I was already in Sydney, and I couldn't believe this chap had arrived from about 10 minutes down the road from me back home. And at that point, you didn't have. I was thinking about this morning. You didn't have certs, right? You weren't a big cert fan at that point.
Yeah. So at that point, the ecosystem wasn't as heavy on certification. I kind of got by in my whole contracting career without having them, which obviously you wouldn't get away with now, right? But the difference really was when I got to Australia, I found that the reputation I had in London wasn't really enough to pass me through the process. So SquarePeg, who are now part of Simplus, were kind enough to sponsor me and help me get my certs done. So they made me feel very welcome as a newcomer down under, and of course it was you that got me the role there.
Yeah, and that was a stipulation that this guy needs to get certs pretty quickly. Like, we can't put him out on client sites without certs. And was that the big difference you saw between London and Sydney, or were there other kind of major differences?
The markets were very similar actually in a lot of ways, culturally especially, but London's contract market was obviously a lot bigger at that time. I think Sydney's contract market has grown a lot since that time. I found the tax outrageous as well in Sydney compared to London, but still very, you can make very good money on the contract market down there, definitely.
Yeah. I think in London you get taxed as you barely pay tax as a contractor, right? And in Sydney you pay tax as just like you were earning that money as a permanent employee.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's changed now in London anyway. I think they've kind of reined that in a little bit now, but from what I hear. But yeah, the corporate culture, very similar between London and Sydney, I thought.
Yeah, and lifestyle-wise, how did you find living in Sydney?
I was absolutely in love with it. I found a place in Manly at first, and I was just getting the boat into
the ferry.
Yeah,
Tequila UK, the boat.
Tequila UK. I mean, it's terrible. I forget the names of places, right? But I got the ferry into Circular Quay every morning, and I just this really is amazing. It certainly beats having to elbow my way onto the Central Line in Bethnal Green every morning. A step up there.
For sure.
After I think it was about a year in, I moved out to, I guess what you would call more like Eastern Sydney, like Marrickville way.
Inner West.
Inner West, yeah, and so I loved Marrickville as well. It was a very different vibe, and nightlife was a lot better to Manning, I thought, and a little bit more like parts of London.
Yeah. So then, obviously, you're now in Colombia. How did that come about, and what do you do in Colombia?
Sure. So for a long time I've worked in Salesforce consulting partners. And I'd always used their nearshore and offshore teams, and I always found it had the same hang-ups wherever I went. Like, the communication was difficult, and the quality was an issue, and the time zones made things tricky as well. But I'd always kind of have my eye on that and wanted to set something up that addressed those pain points. And so far we've been able to deliver almost like a rebooted nearshore service in that respect to partners and end users in the US. I mean, we're on a US time zone, which makes things more easy straight away. But probably what sets us apart is how we train people to give like an onshore standard level of consulting, like a client facing experience.
Sure.
A lot of the nearshore offshore teams tend to be focused on custom dev, and while we've got that capability, we're more a team of client facing functional consultants, so we can kind of.
So this is Twilo, and obviously your business. How many people? How many people now?
We've got 8 now. So I've been going about 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, like I think this is the beauty of Salesforce, right? So you'd worked in London, you moved to Sydney, got a job like 4 days into moving to Sydney, I think. And I can't promise everyone that experience, but at that time that was realistic, right? Now you're living in Colombia, you've moved there with family. What other options would you have had available to you in Colombia had you not had this Salesforce experience and also the entrepreneurial mindset to then set up a business, right? But like, would this have been a realistic move without the Salesforce skills that you have?
I think it would have been difficult because the Salesforce skills have enabled me to earn a salary that's in relatively in tune with the developed countries. So if I'd come here without that, it would have been a lot more. I would have been a lot more nervous about it, put it that way.
Sure.
Because obviously then you've got to come here and you've got to find your way and set up a business doing something else, and a lot more risk. But just the fact that there's outside the COVID-19 situation, there's normally so much work going around in the Salesforce world that we knew we were going to be able to kind of break into the US with time.
Yeah, and how do you approach that? Like, you're a Colombian-based business. Is it just literally you're smashing the phones and introducing yourselves to as many AEs across the US as possible, or what's the vision or the initial vision?
Yeah, sure. So we when we started off, we were actually doing white label work with Tequila in Australia. So we were kind of managing a very tricky time difference and having to work from like Sunday to Thursday rather than Monday to Friday and that kind of thing. So, but that sort of gave me a safety net as far as continuity went. So I was working with Tequila in Australia before I went, so I was able then just to carry that on when I got to Colombia and not feel the pressure of having to go out and get new clients. And really, for the first phase of it, we were more interested in working with partners. So recently, we've been doing more, seeing more direct work coming to us, which is great. But yeah, initially it was a case of sort of picking up the phone and having to build my network in the US, which takes time because if you can't rely on your network in the UK or Australia because you're in this part of the world, then you've got to start from scratch a little bit and build up your contact base, and that took a little bit of time.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next challenge is building a team, because I can't imagine there's like a user group or in the part of Colombia you're in. Maybe there is, but yeah, like actually then going and building a team of 8 people. How have you approached that?
Sure. So yeah, there are other like Globant, one of the big outsourcing firms are here, and the usual suspects like PwC and Accenture have got a presence here as well. Not so much in Medellin, but in Bogota mainly. So they are here, but actually we've found that our focus really is on creating our own consultants from scratch. We prefer to do that. And I think that's an opportunity that not enough firms in the ecosystem take. So, generally we look for graduates with some experience in the corporate world. Maybe they've got exposure to like analytics or sales or finance or the tech industry. But essentially, we're starting with a blank canvas, and they haven't picked up any bad habits elsewhere. So then we put them through this intense training program. I mean, we like Trailhead, and that's a fantastic resource, but we use it really more for background reading. And then the first few months is a pretty brutal, intense kind of training period where we get them into Sales Cloud and CPQ, and focuses on a mixture of like training sessions and agile build exercises, which are like simulations of real life projects we've done in the past. And then after that, we've done with the real life training, and at that point we get the certifications done, and then we've created someone that can shadow a more experienced person on the live projects. So sure. It's a long tail, and you have to put work into it, but it does work. And that all of the guys that we've got on our team now have been through that process.
Because that must take a lot of effort, not just for them, but for you, right? Training them and giving them that experience.
So at first it was me, and I still get involved in it, but I've committed everything to video now. And because we've kind of got our first generation, our first 4 really strong consultants out in the market for a while now, we're able to then kind of use them, whoever's on the bench or whatever, we're able to use them to repeat this process for the newcomers.
Sure. And what's the kind of lead time in your experience from getting someone in the door to actually being able to effectively deliver a project as a functional consultant?
So I mean, like I said, that first 2 or 3 months training is really intense. It uses up every minute of every day in that time, and once we're done with that, that's the technical aspects, and that's one part of it. But we also focus on the consulting side and how to run projects, how to deal with clients, best practices, good user experience, and after that first phase of it is over, then we start lowering them gently into projects, and they shadow the other consultants, and that goes on for like a 6-12 month period, depending on the individual, and they gradually over that period start becoming independent enough to go over to the next level and keep projects moving without me needing to be involved in every last decision.
Yeah, nice. So as you mentioned, a lot of your projects are in the US. What do US projects look like in your experience compared to like a London or Sydney based project that you've been exposed to?
Well, it's a bit like when you go on holiday to the US and everything just seems much bigger. And that kind of applies here as well. Like culturally, having seen and lived in lots of different places, scale aside, I've learned that Americans, Brits, Australians, whoever, they all like to think they're completely different culturally from each other, but really they're actually more similar than they realise. Their differences are kind of more nuanced than anything. So it really just but on a bigger scale, I find that the US the US seem to adopt the technologies a little bit quicker, maybe a year or 2 ahead. Other than that, I love the optimism of the Americans. You have to really sell yourself hard, and that'd be a big taboo in Britain.
Yeah, and in Australia, for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned they adopt things quicker, and you've been quite heavily involved in CPQ and also FSL projects, which we are seeing more and more pop up in Australia. But I definitely wouldn't suggest they're as kind of frequently used or implemented as they're going to be over the coming years. So what have you learned? How did you get across CPQ and FSL, and what have you learned about each product and the kind of pitfalls that projects can go down if not careful?
Sure. So I guess when I first got into CPQ, that was about 4 years ago, and since then that market in the US especially has just exploded. You can't move for the CPQ at the moment. And that's probably going to happen to a certain extent with billing and field service over the next few years as well. I like to break into these new clouds. Salesforce has got all these new clouds coming up all over the place, and it's good to learn about them in advance and be ready just in case they come up. But obviously that's a process that takes time as well, right? So I've got a formula really for breaking into something new like that, and CPQ and Billing was that first major diversion outside of traditional Salesforce, and then field service came after that, and by having learned CPQ, I already had like shortcuts to master FSL too. So I think your first phase there really is to, you have to spend like weeks learning about the technology and applying that in developer orgs and really knowing the process. Like the process is so important to understanding the technology as a whole. And then probably your last step is trying to refine that into what a Salesforce project actually looks like practically. Make sure you know the boundaries of the product and where you can get caught out underestimating the effort. I'd say it probably takes a year of like consistently working on a new technology before you really get the depth to give you confidence going into every engagement. But that's not to say that you can't break into something new. It's just really about doing your research up front and
Sure.
and knowing enough that you can lead a design period, and then you can learn more once you get into build. It's part of kind of technology, I guess, is one of the great things about it is that we're always learning new skills. So these new tools come along quite frequently.
Sure. So if we look at CPQ specifically, because I know that's kind of been an area that you've done a lot of work, and you would, I guess, that would be quite a core area of what Twilo are doing right now.
We're doing mostly CPQ and a little bit of billing as well. As a result of that, we see like sales and service cloud as well.
Yeah. So where do companies go wrong when they're implementing CPQ or billing? Like, what are the kind of challenges that you see companies facing through the process of a project?
I think one of the main things is really how you scope and estimate the project. You've got to put in more during the discovery period. You really want all the surprises to be removed from the scope before you kind of commit to an SOW. As well as that, I think probably the UAT takes a bit longer than it would do with a sales and a service cloud project. The project itself, like the build phase as well, will also take longer. So it's knowing that you're going to be able to achieve. Sometimes the client will come to you with like a really complex Excel calculator, and then you've got to take that away and make sure that you can actually do it in CPQ, but B, you can do it in a way that isn't like a poor user experience.
And do you see much that comes across that can't be done in CPQ, that like an Excel document that can't be translated into a CPQ solution?
Not that much, but I'm sure they do exist, but they probably don't get to as far as me in the qualification. We do see them come in where sometimes there you've got to create a quote calculator plugin to enhance what's there on the interface. And some common use cases for that, like maybe you've got to bring a time-based element into quoting, or you've got to bring in a load of account sites that relate to different products. There's plenty of places where CPQ on its own wouldn't really do it, and you'd need to enhance it a little bit more.
And enhance it with like, what's that? Is that extra development or other products, App Exchange products?
Yeah, so you can develop on top using these quote calculator plugins. So you could, for instance, design a UI that pops out within the quote line editor, and then writes back information back into the quote.
Okay, cool. And then on billing, I know you did a billing project in Australia, I believe. We're not seeing a huge amount. We're hearing of a few more pop up, but I think globally it's still like we don't have huge numbers in terms of billing customers. So I think people are still kind of learning as they're going and trying to pick the brains of people that have done it, but there's not a huge data set. So what was your exposure to billing like?
Yeah, it was good fun, and you have to with billing, you really need to understand the finance lingo and understand how the world of finance works, rather than just kind of knowing about the technology. So I think we'll see some big growth in that pushed CPQ into the most was probably in software as a service models, and SaaS is a great fit for billing as an extension to the CPQ process. So I think, now they've got through that first explosion of CPQ. Now we're seeing a lot more kind of manufacturing companies come into it, and they're typically like late adopters. So I think the SaaS companies will probably start adopting billing in the next year or two.
Yeah. And FSL, I know I've read some of your articles on FSL. Is that something you're seeing really kicking? Because we're seeing more of that coming through in Australia.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that start to kick off?
Yeah, and I think after the whole COVID situation's over, I think that will explode in the same way that CPQ did a few years ago. It's definitely getting more and more common.
And what's a great use case for FSL?
Well, there are lots of different use cases for it. So the typical ones are break fix, planned maintenance. But you can also use it in sales context. You can use it as an extension to Sales Cloud or to Service Cloud. You can use it to push in messages from an IoT setup and create maintenance appointments automatically based on failures in devices and that kind of thing. There's a wide range of use cases for it. The ones that I'm probably more careful about at the moment are anything involving like dependencies and complex sequences of work. So I think their product will probably get there in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, nice. And they've obviously they acquired the other FSL business. I can't remember what they're called. Click Software. Yeah. And I think that was obviously a really strong product that is only going to help Salesforce kind of get to where they want to be with FSL.
Yeah, definitely. That acquisition of Click, I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier, because there was kind of a bit of an unusual relationship between Salesforce and Click, where Click developed field service Lightning for Salesforce, but normally under those conditions, Salesforce would be in there with an acquisition, but it took a little bit longer.
Yeah. So talking of plans and growing businesses and acquiring businesses and so on, what's the plan for Twilo? What does the future look like?
Sure. So I don't think we're going to be acquiring anyone just yet, but we definitely want to expand both sides of the business. We enjoy working with other partners, and to really gives us access to enterprise projects and bigger budgets, and we also love the direct work started coming into us, and it's a sign that we're growing our reputation in the US as well. So I'd love to see, like I mentioned, I'd love to see like the trajectory of field service and billing just like go up over the next few years, and hopefully we'll kind of ride the wave and be involved in plenty of interesting projects.
And you see the business staying Colombia based?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the long-term plan was always to try and like get a little bit of a US presence, but definitely keep the operations here in Colombia, which allows us to concentrate on quality, but also be a little bit aggressive in pricing. So we've got that rare mixture of quality and lower cost.
Yeah, nice. And I'm just waiting for my invite to Colombia Dreaming. Surely that's got to be something you're planning, and I'll happily be a recruiter speaker at the first Colombia Dreaming when that comes around. Yeah,
you're welcome. Come over whenever.
As long as you're paying for the flight.
We'll pick you up from the airport.
Yeah, I think I'll need that.
Just in case.
Well, look, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed the chat. And if anyone does want to reach out to pick your brains on any of what you've said today, or product related, company related, what's the best place? Yeah,
sure. So our website is www.twilo.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to get in touch, really, is through LinkedIn.
Cool. Thank you very much. I've been calling it Twilo the whole discussion, so I apologize. Twilo it is.
Yeah, Twilo, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, and all the best.
No worries. Thanks.